I went to a baseball game, kids, and quite unexpectedly to me, the experience turned into an hour about baseball history and money and sports and urban identity and rivalries and the American Civil War and the afterlife. I hope you can dig all that, because I'm going to tell you all about it on the other side.
Hello, you're listening to the John Huff Podcast. Oh, yay.
Hey, how you actually doing? You know, we ask people that question all the time. Hey, how you doing, man? How you doing, Jack? But do we really mean it? And do we answer it honestly? How you really doing? It's Monday. I'm a little foggy, and I went to a baseball game. Friday night, I went to a baseball match, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, if you're from a certain part of the world and a certain time period, you're thinking, okay, Blue Jays, let's play. That's way too high for a Monday morning, but that's what you're thinking, right? You say, I went to the ball game. Oh, you went to see the Jays. No, nay. I went to see a local baseball match. Friday evening at historic Labatt Park in L-Town, the oldest continually operating baseball park in the world. Although we regularly have arguments with certain ballparks in America about that, the records show Labatt Park in L-Town is the oldest continually operating baseball park in the world, so yay. Went down to see what is actually one of the oldest rivalries in sports, and nobody realizes it. Went down to see L-Town London Majors versus Guelph Royals in what is, I believe, the Inter-County Baseball League. And this is, most of the people who play in this league, I gather, this is an amateur league, and they are typically college-age players, some of whom play college ball in various places or have. I think it's a wide-open age range, but a lot of the players play summer ball, keeping up their college eligibility, and some good high-level baseball, man. Gotta tell you, it was some pretty good stuff. But what's fun about it for me is that this is historic, okay? So I went to see London Majors against Guelph Royals, but if we roll back time, if we put on our reverse kaleidoscope and we wheel it backwards 130, 140, 150 years, what you find is one of the first, most intense, and oldest rivalries in organized sports, okay? Roll it back 140 years, 130 years to the very ballpark I went to, and you will find the London Tecumsehs hosting the Guelph Maple Leafs. Two of, at the time, the preeminent baseball franchises in the world. No joke, kids. Baseball had a period in the 1870s, 1880s when it was a legit big, bad deal, okay? And the nerve centers, the epicenters of baseball in Canada were Guelph and were London, all right? Warms my cockles, because when I was a student at the University of Guelph many, many moons ago, a history student, I did a paper, one of many, in my urban history course about baseball's connection to growing communities. Back in those days, the cities were just becoming a thing, all right? A lot of people had been rural dwellers. We've mentioned this sort of thing before, but in the late 1800s, Industrial Revolution, all that stuff, a lot of immigration, from Europe. people were beginning to move into cities, and so cultures of cities began to be formed. How did people live in these urban centers? We had been rural for so dang long. What is urban culture? How do we make a livable, good city? How do you make a city at all? But how do you make one that's livable, that has entertainment, that has things for people to do, quite apart from jobs? We were building the world that we live in now, and we recognize as mostly urban dwellers. But back in the day, this was all kind of new. And so in an urban history course, entertainment and civic identity were new things. How do you distinguish yourself as a Guelph person from being a Toronto person or a Hamilton person or a London person or whatever? And one of the things that helped a person identify as a Guelphite or an Hamiltonian, whatever, one of the things that began to create these civic identities was baseball for communities where baseball was played. It's like we don't like those London people because we are Guelph Maple Leaf fans, and vice versa. And so I spent many happy hours in the archives of the University of Guelph looking at primary source documents on this stuff, trying to formulate a notion of why baseball was so popular, and it was, and what impact or implication that had for growing cities and civic identities and rivalries, etc., etc., etc. And there's a notion out there that's high-minded and highfalutin that says, well, the reality is that baseball is a very kind of pastoral game. You play it in this big open field, and people who were living in these growing oppressive cities pined for the fields, pining for the open fields, of their ancestors, maybe that they even grew up in. And so what appealed to people about baseball was this notion of being back in a pastoral setting, this idyllic, natural setting. It took away the kind of pressure of urban life to be sitting in a baseball field, feeling as though you're back out in the country, watching what was then and is now a slow-paced freaking game, man. I don't know about that. My feeling is that sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, man. Maybe they just freaking liked baseball. Entertainment is entertainment. And there are people today who like baseball. And sometimes you throw up an eyebrow at them. But, I have to tell you, some of the most intense sporting that I've ever watched was playoff baseball. And I really like playoff baseball, especially if a team you cheer for happens to be in it. That, for me, is the Blue Jays, which 30-odd years ago was a great thing, and subsequently has not been such a great thing. Jays making the playoffs is a rare occurrence anymore because baseball is crooked as F, and your Dodgers, Yankees, Bo Sox, etc. just continue to dominate and buy everybody and outspend everybody else, and you do not have a level, if you'll pardon the pun, playing field. The infield is not level in baseball. And so it's pretty freaking rare for your team to make the playoffs if you're not one of those giant spenders. And the funny thing is, 'twas ever thus. Now let's roll back in time, okay? The Guelph team, when it really rose to prominence, was owned and managed by a cat called George Sleeman. Stop in your tracks if the name Sleeman tinkles any bells for you. Yes, Sleeman of the Sleeman family of Sleeman family breweries. Sleeman beer, you've had it on tap, all right? The Sleeman factory still exists in Guelph as far as I know. That is a Guelph-based family and tradition, all right? So there used to be a brewery called the Silver Creek Brewery. Was run by the Sleeman family. Okay, so back in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, the Sleeman name was as big a name as you could get in around the city of Guelph. George Sleeman was not the patriarch, but I think the son of the patriarch of this family. think he was the first mayor of Guelph when Guelph was incorporated. A hugely prominent name in politics, business, and sporting and civics. The Sleemans, man. George Sleeman had been an athlete and had pitched for the Guelph Maple Leafs as this team was coming together, as baseball was being decided upon. What are the rules of this game even? What is it? Baseball was being formulated. People were beginning to play it. And then as they began to play it, they began to organize teams and to play against each other, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This was the foundational part. And this was happening in football. This was happening in football in Europe. There's a terrific series that, I don't know if it was on Prime or Netflix. I think it was called The English Game. And it was a mini series out a few years ago about the origins of organized football / soccer in England, how this game was created and developed, and the FA Cup, and the origins of footy. This was happening all over the place, and it's an interesting study as to why. Maybe people were, again, moving into the cities. There was this greater population. Maybe people had more free time. I think we had switched to a situation where a lot of people were working regular hours, long ones, but maybe there was extra free time. Maybe there was money to be spent on entertainment. I'm not sure. I have not dug deeply into the origins of organized sports, but it's worth an inquiry, and perhaps one day I'll do that. But if you're interested in these kind of origin stories, and if you're a footy fan, get your hands on, I think it's called The English Game. Should have confirmed that. Sorry, I didn't. But it was a really compelling thing, and it's a fictionalized, it's a film presentation of the real story. You know, it's a mini-series, and it's about these teams beginning to form and play against each other and dominate, and then the money starts coming in, man. The money starts coming in. And this happened almost immediately in baseball in Canada and elsewhere in and around the 1870s. So George Sleeman was a pitcher for the Maple Leafs, retired from that, took over the family brewery, was extraordinarily wealthy, took over operation of the Guelph Maple Leafs team, all right? And what's really compelling is that seems like within minutes of doing so, Guelph had a rivalry with London already, the London Tecumsehs, and the Woodstock Young Canadians, I think they were called, and there was a team in Hamilton and Toronto and America. These cities, Guelph, London, were major players in the baseball world, okay? Major players. And so they would play against American teams that we know now. There would be exhibition games with the Boston Red Stockings, or the Chicago White Stockings, who eventually became the Chicago Cubs, or the St. Louis Brown Stockings, who eventually became the St. Louis Cardinals, all right? There was the National League started in America, and a rival league started to go against the National League, and your Londons and Guelphs were in that league. These were major hotspots for baseball. But we'll roll back to George Sleeman, takes over management of this team, being a competitive person. That has not changed, man. Immediately starts paying players. Right off the hop, what we're going to do is we're going to bring in some ringers to this team, and we're going to pay them to do that. This was a new concept, man. So all of a sudden, there's this influx of hot shot American ball players coming in and getting paid by Sleeman to play for the team. Interesting. That was new, and that doesn't seem right. But of course, it took 13 seconds for the rest of the leagues and the rest of the teams to follow suit. So all of a sudden, London's incorporating paid guys, And this arms race began, but it's so funny. Nothing has changed, man. The numbers have changed, but the concepts haven't changed. I'm going to bring in and pay some of the best guys to play for my team. And we're going to do that too. And the arms race begins. And I was sifting around in the archives because the University of Guelph has an enormous archive of George Sleeman's personal writing, his personal correspondence, a lot of the notes about this stuff. So you can dig in, man, up to your elbows in the real telegrams, etc., sent back and forth. They have them in the archives. And there's a wonderful moment. I'm sifting through, right? And so what would happen is that you had your league and you would play in your league, but there was big gate. There was big gate to be had in these exhibition matches. So if you're Guelph and you can get the Boston Red Stockings to come up to Guelph and play, you're looking at thousands of tickets sold, man. And so they would do these exhibition games all the time. And they would do exhibition tours, and a team would get on the train and travel around to a bunch of cities. Might go to Cleveland, might go to Detroit, Columbus, go play Boston. There were teams in New York that you could go and play. There was a team that was a Ku Klux Klan team. Played those guys too, you know? And so I'm looking through the archives, University of Guelph, and Sleeman is corresponding with somebody out there about an exhibition series. Maybe Chicago's going to come for a few games, or Boston is, or back and forth, whatever. And there was this back and forth about how many games we were going to play. And I'm paraphrasing, but I'm pretty close to an exact quote on this. There was a little offhand comment from one party to the other, I'm not sure which, that said, maybe we should do this number of games. The more games, the more money, you know. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Right from the beginning, man. Right from the beginning, this was a money venture. You know, the right people take over, and it's about winning. We're going to pay players to come and do that. And then it's about how much box can we make, man. Immediately, it's about the money with Sleeman, all these other cats. And the same thing happened if you watch the English game. You know, a guy comes along and he's playing for one team. They brought him in, a couple of them from Scotland, to come and play for these English teams. And then somebody offers more money. And suddenly it's this game of, holy cow, I can get paid for this? And the money starts throwing back and forth. And now you find the way football is now, footy, soccer, you know, there's in almost every league in the world, there's one or two dominant teams, the biggest, wealthiest dominant teams. And it's not okay. It's not okay. English Premier League is getting better because there's a lot of money in the Premier League. But it's, you know, Manchester City has won 5 of the last 6 or 4 of the last 5, whatever. City dominating. Chelsea has dominated in the past 20 years because they're willing to spend the most money. Newcastle is about to because they were bought by a consortium of people worth something like $300 billion, pounds, whatever. The money runs the show. You know, we've tried to put in safeguards in North America that allow a certain type of parity. You see that in the NHL, fine. I think it's gone too far. Personally, I like the notion of dynasties. I like the notion that a team can be a big team and stay a big team. I'm offended by this idea, particularly in the NHL these days, that your team has to be really, really bad before it can be really, really good, because you got to get the draft picks, right? And then when your team gets to be really, really good, you can't stay really, really good. You know, you can't afford to. You can't keep the team together. They get old, and then you've got to drop again. And there's these cycles. It seems very playground to me. Maybe I am unique in that opinion. I don't know. But I don't like this notion of complete parity. It seems to take some of the ambition out of it, at least from a certain perspective. There's got to be a fine line. There's got to be a way to balance this. So a team that wants to be a giant can be a giant, but other teams that aren't giants can still be competitive on some level. I don't know how you do that. In the English Premier League, there are still 5 or 6 dominant teams that are the biggest and wealthiest teams, but there is so much money now, particularly in broadcasting the English Premier League, that those smaller teams get a lot of money too to spend. And this is how player acquisition works, by the way, in most of the rest of the world in soccer, is you buy players. There's no draft. You know, there's none of this college. It's like you go and you identify a kid at 6 years old who looks like he's got potential, and he gets signed to Arsenal or to Chelsea or to wherever, right? 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, these kids are already signed. They're in your youth academy and they grow up playing in your team. And then you hope that when they're 17, 18, they actually make it to the first team and become players. If not, you sell them on. But it's all done by acquisition. You sell a player, you buy a player. And so if you're a team with all the money, of course, that gives you an advantage on the rest of the teams in your league, right? And that's not all right either. There has to be, they've tried to introduce what they call financial fair play rules, which only allows you to spend a certain amount of your revenue, whatever. It's like it's funny math, and the big teams ignore it utterly. There's got to be a way to do this right. My point is that 140 years ago, George Schlieman's hiring players and having correspondence with other teams about making bigger gate, play more games, get more money. And I find it compelling that nothing has changed in 140 years, man. We say that the money has ruined the game. Money is ruining baseball. Money is ruining football. Money is ruining it. Dude, it's been there from the beginning. The second they organized sports, because these were organized by competitive people, and competitive people want to do what? They want to win, kids. And so they'll do what it takes to win. And these teams were started by entrepreneurs. And what do entrepreneurs want to do? They want to make the money. Man, it has not changed. Entrepreneurs are the movers and shakers. They're the ones that organize stuff. And sometimes that stuff is organized for the benefit of the community. A lot of times that stuff is organized for the benefit of the wallet. But it's okay, because if 10,000 people come and see the Red Stockings play the Guelph Maple Leafs in 18 whatever, so much the better. People make the bank, and folks have a good time, whatever it is about baseball that brings them out. And baseball brought them out, kids, by the thousands. It was a big freaking deal for a while. And then it kind of dropped, and teams folded, and then they came back, and whatever. And then baseball in the early 1900s into the 1920s and 30s began to look a little bit like what we know as baseball now. But for me, going to the game on Friday night was about stepping back in time, man. This sort of thing, for me, it warmed my cockles enormously, because I'm going to see London against Guelph at Labatt Park, which used to be Tecumseh Park, which is the same park. You know, I read all kinds of newspaper accounts of games between Guelph and London back in the day. We're talking 130 years ago. I read accounts of some of those matches, and I'm sitting in the park where they happened. And when I'm in a situation like that, if you've been listening to me long enough, you know immediately I'm not in the present day. All right, the stadium looks different now. The bleachers are different. Everything is different. But I'm trying to picture 1878 or 1884. And I'm trying to see the people. I'm seeing the players in their kind of old school baseball uniforms, those big gloves and those hats. Field of Dreams stuff, right? And I'm trying to see the people, the spectators in their thousands coming to the game. And I don't know, horses tied to trees, horses and buggies, I don't know. But in my mind, I'm sitting along the first baseline, watching this kid from Guelph zipping that ball in there, by the way. Guelph won the match. This kid who was pitching for them threw a gem. It was like a 2-hit shutout. Still throwing heat in the 9th inning, pitched the whole game. Kid was dynamite. London's pitcher was dynamite too. It was a 2-0 game. An error cost them badly, some dodgy infield work, and that's all it takes at this level, kids. You know, Guelph and London are both very good teams in this league, and you make a couple of errors, you're going to lose. And with that kid throwing the way he was throwing, no, man, they couldn't touch him. They could not touch. It took him like the 6th, 7th, 8th inning before they even started to touch this guy. Hit him hard a couple of times, but right to an outfielder, right to an infielder, you know? Dude threw a great freaking game, and I'm going to go to more because the playoffs are starting. But for me, I'm not watching that. I'm watching Guelph and London, and I'm watching it like it was 1881. And I'm seeing it in color, man. History was lived in color. History was not lived in sepia tones. History was not lived in black and white. These games were played in color, and I'm trying to see it, you know? And it reminds me of, curiously enough, It reminds me of the First Battle of Bull Run. Or First Manassas, depending on where you're from, which was in roughly the same time period, okay? 1861, this was the first major engagement of armies in the American Civil War, okay? This is only 10 years or so, maybe, before what we're talking about. 10, 15 years. This is fresh in the consciousness, all right? Battle of Bull Run, July 1861. First time Confederate and Union forces are going to engage on a major scale. We're talking about 18,000 people from the Confederate side and roughly 18,000 from the Union side. This is South and North. There were more people, there were more soldiers in the area, but actively engaged, about 18,000 on each side. First time, man, first time. Poorly trained troops, not knowing what they were in for. Bull Run, about 30 miles outside of Washington, D.C. And what are you going to do in 1861 if you're a rich cat from Washington, D.C., and the London Tecumsehs are not in town to play Washington? What you going to do with your afternoon? Well, let's pack up the picnic basket and load up the carriage and ride on out to the battle. What? Yeah. Then they did it. In their hundreds, these rich cats, congressmen, movers and shakers of Washington and their families, packed up a picnic basket, rode out 30 miles down the road to see if they could get a look at the battle between North and South, the first major engagement of these armies. And so they get out their, binoculars, spectacles, whatever they did, and don't the artillery shells start firing. And isn't this great fun? Look, they're going at it, as though it were a baseball match or a football game, you know? I think the Union's up 200 to 198 at this point. And this battle ensues, and the smoke and the fire, people are dying, folks. There's something like 12 or 1,300 people died in this first engagement, all right? This is no joke. People went out to watch. They got on their fine, whatever you wear, out to an event in Washington if you're a congressperson, and they went to watch this, eating sandwiches, drinking bottled water that probably cost $4 from the concession, to watch a battle. Then something happened that they weren't expecting. The Confederates from the South broke the Union, broke the lines, and the Union troops scattered like marbles, kids. Full scale, completely unorganized, chaotic abandonment of posts, a full-on, full-scale retreat. And where do you think the retreat went? Straight through the crowd of onlookers. So you're up there eating a sandwich, watching the battle, trying to keep score at home, on your little sheet of paper. Oh, I think one guy just got his head blown off. Is that our guy or their guy? Okay, that's one for them. All of a sudden, you're sitting out on the grass on a blanket. All of a sudden, 18,000 soldiers are running at you. In a complete colossal panic. It's chaos of an unprecedented order. If you're one of those idiots, what is wrong with people? Let's go watch a battle? If you're one of these morons who's out there to watch, all of a sudden a retreating army is just smashing right through you. They're probably taking your wagon. They're probably stealing your horse because there was a complete panic going. And they're not thinking. These troops are just getting out of there because, holy cow, people die in wars. This is the first engagement. Most of these people have not seen combat before. And wait a minute, this isn't a game at all. They're dying out there, and there's shells raining in, and there's smoke, and there's fire, and there's rifle fire happening. The Confederates are not exactly pursuing, but harassing these retreating flanks, and they retreat right through the onlookers. And the people jump on their wagons, and they're trying to get away, and there's like one road back to Washington, and everybody's on it. All the rich aristocrats and 18,000 fleeing Union troops. Made me think of that, when I was watching, trying to picture the spectators in this audience, trying to picture the old school uniforms, the ball game, trying to place myself in this time. It always just reminds me of those idiots who went to watch what is a relatively modern industrial battle between armies. And you shake your head, man. You shake your head at how little respect people have for combat, how little respect people have for war. Very, very easy to be a war hawk when you don't have to actually fight the war. World War I was that. All these kind of czars and monarchs and emperors and kings getting together to slap each other in the faces with gloves, knowing they ain't going to fight, but we're going to send 10 million people to their deaths. For what? For what? For what is the name, incidentally, of my favorite piece of First World War art, or at least one of them. For What is a painting by a Canadian painter, one of the group of 7, called Frederick Varley. Frederick Varley was an official Canadian war artist, of which there were several, hired by the government to go overseas, go to France, to go to Belgium, and to paint the scenes. A.Y. Jackson, another group painter, was one of them, painted some magnificent stuff. Frederick Varley went over there, and he was a cantankerous kind of cat, and in the early days, what they wanted was for this art to be death and glory stuff, right? Charge! And the great glory of dying for one's country. And these massive sprawling scenes of heroism and battle. By the end of the war, you get Varley, and it's like 1918. He's looking around going, what on earth have we done here? And he painted this painting called For What? And it's just like a muddy field, done in the group kind of style, kind of impressionist, actually. We talked about that. And it's just like a dude standing there and 2 bodies on a wagon in the middle of the mud. And it's called For What? This is not death and glory stuff, man. This is a finger of accusation pointed at these rich people and powerful people who started all of this. And this is the consequence of it. Well, I think of those people when I think of the people at the Battle of Bull Run going to watch. Same sort of folks who probably paid baseball players to come and win. And I don't know what to say about that. A lot of progress is created by those people, but a lot of misery too. Not trying to turn this into a proletariat kind of thing. I'm not trying to go all Karl Marx on you here. Incidentally, if you want to see the For What painting, you can. It exists at the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa, which is a magnificent place for you history people, by the way. And there is a First World War exhibit there, which is stunning. And then you follow it along through the museum, and then you go around a corner, and at the end of the aisle, it's a massive canvas, is the actual painting For What? And I got to go and stand there and look at it and was amazed. Magnificent and profound and poignant piece of work that has nothing to do with baseball. I had a great time at the ball game. I'm going to go to another ball game, playoff time, and it was so fun for me to be in the shoes, to be sitting there. I had read the correspondence. I had read the news reports from 130 years ago about games between these 2 teams in this park. And there were no pitched battles, but I seem to recall reading about how one team or the other would have to be escorted to the train station. Major league civic rivalries, and sports fueled that for cities. Sports really fueled that for cities. Up until then, rivalries, if they existed, how could they be enacted? How could they be expressed? When I was in Germany the first time around, 2017, I was in the city of Leverkusen, which is up the street from Düsseldorf. And I was chatting to a guy, and we had just been in Düsseldorf the night before. And, he handed us a beer, because that's what they do in Germany and everywhere in Europe. As soon as you walk in the room, there's something in your hand. And he was asking us about Düsseldorf. Yeah, we played there last night. He said, you should never drink the beer from Düsseldorf. You know that, right? Why? Because the beer in Düsseldorf is made from the sewer water that runs down from Leverkusen. Big rivalry there. Leverkusen and Düsseldorf. Love both cities, by the way. But sports helped create these rivalries between towns because of our team and their team and tribalism and all that stuff. And this began in the late 1800s, all right? And it was fun for me to be sitting there watching London play Guelph in baseball and putting myself in 1880 and seeing that 30 years ago I had researched and read about. Very, very cool. And it's a cool park. It's ancient, but, it's modernized. But to be sitting there and imagining all of those people and all of those years and all of those games and those times, it makes me nostalgic, man. Makes me nostalgic. When I was talking to Tanya Candler on the last episode, we talked about an afterlife. This notion of what the afterlife is. And if there is one, I hope it's one where you can transcend time. Where time and events still exist. And you can visit them. However it works in the quantum field. You can visit parallel universes or whatever. Where things are not, it's not virtual reality. We can already do that. It's not VR, it's not a movie, it's not an immersive event, it's the real thing. And I can go and sit on the bleachers and actually see this for real because it's still happening in a perpetual time loop. Makes me think of a Twilight Zone episode where these two cats go through some sort of time wormhole, something like that, and actually find themselves in the U.S. Civil War, since we're talking about it. These two guys wake up and they're like, wow, there's like a group of soldiers coming, and they look Civil War. Is there a reenactment happening? Not a reenactment, kids. It's the real thing. And all of a sudden, the shells are flying, and they're like, wow, the Civil War was no freaking joke, man. And it wasn't. 600,000 Americans died in the U.S. Civil War, okay? It was no joke. It was horrendous. An horrendous experience and an awful, awful war. But I want to be able to go see this knowing that I'm already dead. I'm not actually in any danger. I have a friend who has this experience in real life. So she will go to Greece and be in some ancient place, and people will be walking past her in what appears to be period costume. Nobody else can see those people, kids. They are the real thing. She's psychic, all right? She's clairvoyant, and one of her gifts is to be able to see the history that happened where she's standing. Trippy. And she thinks she can teach me to do that too. And if that's the case, I'm going to the ball game, man. Going to the ball game. Probably going to drop by the first battle of Bull Run and yell at the people there if they can hear me. And I'm going to a lot of places because I'm a history person and I get the nostalgia. I went to the drive-in. 2020. Went to see, I think it was Tenet, that utterly inscrutable movie, Tenet. And I still don't know what it was about. And I don't care what it was about because the drive-in was another time warp. I didn't grow up going to the movies. I was an evangelical kid. We didn't go to the movies. We wouldn't want to be seen to be doing something so worldly. Totally fine if you want to bring the movies home, though. Not about the content, it's about the optics, I guess. And so I never went to the movies, never went to the theater, never went to the drive-in, never had that experience, man. Was not allowed. When I broke away from that, I could do whatever I wanted, but I still never went to the drive-in because who goes to the freaking drive-in? Well, in 2020, when there's a pandemic happening and the theaters are shut, that's when you go to the drive-in. So my buddy and I went to see Tenet, and for me, it was sheer and utter freaking magic. Because it was the 70s, man. It was 1976. They even had a couple of old school cars there, like muscle cars from the 70s, sitting out there as part of the atmosphere. And it's very much the same now as it was then. The tech is the tech. So you pull up and you park and it's out in the country and there's a little place there where you can get your popcorn, maybe a hot dog and a couple of 70s muscle cars. And if you use your imagination, it's the 70s again, And I never had that experience. And being in that environment, I'm not like my friend who actually sees the real history, but I have a great imagination for that kind of thing, man. And suddenly I could just picture that it was 1976 and I was sitting there watching a movie at the drive-in and just absorbing my perception of what it was like in 1976 to be doing that. And I loved it. So it was at the baseball match, And yeah, if there's an afterlife, I want an afterlife where I can skip time, where I can go to Rome if I want to and see that, or I can go further back, or I can go to the baseball match in 1871, or I can drop by the trenches of 1917, safe and whatever. I want an afterlife where I can skip time and see history for real, yo. This is what's going through my head as I'm watching the baseball game. I don't know if it's going through anybody else's head watching the baseball game, but it was for me. And it was great. And you should support local, okay? We've done a lot of supporting the local soccer team because we are footy fans. Go watch the local amateurs play. Go watch the local aspiring amateurs play, all right? It's great. Tickets are cheap. It's high level of performance. And it's just a really cool thing to do. So if your town, if your city has got a lacrosse team or a soccer team or a baseball team or a football team, that's, junior age kids and older playing at a high level, go support that stuff, man. Don't spend $8 million to go watch the Leafs play. Because why would you anyhow? Spend the $12, go watch your local amateur baseball team play, your travel team, or your local development league soccer team play, or there's minor league basketball here in L-Town. Go watch that stuff. Support it, man, because it's cool and it's fun. And those people are playing at a very high level. If you had sat with me along the first baseline and watched this kid pitch for Guelph, you'd be like, man, dude is throwing smoke, and he was. So was London's pitcher, by the way. Very high-level stuff. Fun, community supporting. Might even get yourself a little rivalry, all right? So go and do that. What I'm going to do is the Patreon plug, all right? I know you've been waiting for it. It's the Patreon plug. I need a jingle. Somebody write me up a Patreon plug jingle, okay? Send that in. Very quickly, I do have a Patreon page for the podcast. It is patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. You will not be surprised to hear. And for the low price of $5 a month, man, I only have one tier of membership, one tier of support. $5 Canadian a month, you can support the show if you are so inclined. That is, cup of coffee, couple cups of coffee at Starbucks. You can think of it as throwing me a $1.25 tip for every episode I do. If you're getting something out of this, if you are being entertained, if you are being in some way educated, if you are being pacified, if you just like hearing another voice, if you're getting something from what I'm doing here, I beseech you, please consider supporting via Patreon. I don't want to have ads on the show. I'm avoiding doing ad reads. I would prefer voluntary support via Patreon. Patreon makes that possible, and I really like that model. It's you saying, I like this content. I want to support this content. I don't want to listen to ads about underwear. I want to help out. $5 a month, patreon.com/John Huff Podcast, and you can do that. And if you do that, I'd certainly appreciate it. Don't want to do that? That's cool. The podcast will remain free and accessible wherever you enjoy fine podcasts. Totally fine. But I got to tell you, there are weeks when this becomes a full-time job. Some of the histories that I do basically become a full-time job. The research, the organizing, the outlining, the prepping these episodes, the recording, the editing, the marketing, it becomes a full-time job. And it's tough for me to keep that up, And so if you can and you feel inclined to support in that way, I certainly do appreciate it. If not, please do share these episodes. If you like what I'm doing, go tell somebody, as King's X said. Ratings and reviews, I continue to ask for ratings and reviews on your podcast platform. I cannot compete with celebrities who come on and do dating advice or hookup podcasts. Can't compete with it, man. They have big money behind them, big money marketing them, big money pushing them. And what happens if you're an indie musician? You know this game already. You just get pushed out. So me elbowing my way in just a little bit is helped along by ratings and reviews on your podcast platform. So please consider doing that. Please consider sharing these episodes. And those of you who have and who do, my sincere thank you. My sincere thank you to the patrons who have come along. I certainly appreciate it, man and woman, and whatever you identify as. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm done plugging now. Patreon.com/John Huff Podcast with my eternal thanks. We're getting there. I didn't know how long the baseball thing was going to go, but sometimes you just turn on the tap and away it goes. Very quickly, you got to listen to some new music, okay? Archers of Loaf, the great Loaf, are back again. A couple years ago, just before COVID hit, the Loaf released a couple of singles, their first new music in a long dang time, like a decade, more than a decade. And they were great. And then it seemed like there was going to be a record and a tour and COVID. How many times have we heard that freaking story? But the Loaf are officially back again. And they recently released a song called In the Surface Noise. They are releasing on October 21st a brand new record, Reason in Decline. And if you are into indie rock, if you are into noise rock, if you are into any of that sort of thing, Archers of Loaf, if you have not listened, please do so. They were a big thing back around the 90s. Released 4 records. I was introduced to them by our old pal, the poet Chris Banks, who was interviewed on this podcast some time ago. Go listen to that fabulous and fascinating story. Really loved the Loaf. I had not really encountered this kind of music before. I was so wrapped up in the glam scene and the metal scene. And then along comes Banksy, and he's like, check this out. It's a little bit different than maybe what you're used to. And I did, and I loved it. All right. They are an indie rock band. They are a noise rock band. They are loud, and they are really terrific. And I became a big Archers of Loaf fan from that moment. And I was around for a few years while they were putting out records, and then they went away, as bands tend to do. But they are back. In the Surface Noise is a great song. Really cool. Just big guitars, big toms, cool chorus. I really like the Loaf, and I've been able to see them live. I've been able to see Eric Bachman live doing his thing. He's the singer a couple times. Fabulous. Been able to talk to him. Great guy. Go check out the new Archers of Loaf song, In the Surface Noise. I saw today that they're releasing another new single tomorrow, so go check it out and get ready. October 21st, Reason in Decline, the first new Archers of Loaf record for like 20 years. So that's cool, man. I was going to talk about King's X. We're already running late, but the new King's X record is coming imminently. September, all right. 3 sides of one. They have released 2 singles, Let It Rain and Give It Up. And you want to talk about warm cockles, man? King's X is back. I know Ty Tabor is having some troubles right now, health-wise. It's not been revealed what those troubles are, but they are serious. That's forcing them to adjust their schedule a bit, but the record is coming. Those 2 singles, Let It Rain and Give It Up. Just bangers, man. Just good old-fashioned bangers, and King's X fans have been waiting since 2008 for a new record. Finally, it's coming. And they've been playing some live shows and doing some of the new tunes live, so they're beginning to filter out. They've been playing Let It Rain, they've been playing Give It Up. Give It Up is just got this great kind of old school guitar riff on it, some really fun King's X harmonies. King's X is famous for their drop tuning. They are famous for Doug Pinnick's vocals and Ty's really tasty guitar work and Jerry's just rock solid drums. They're famous for all these things, but as famous for their vocal harmonies. They're all natural, kids. Go see King's X live. They're going to sing every freaking note of those harmonies with no tapes and no tracks and no BS, man. They don't do any of that stuff. Jerry counts it in, they play the song, and they play the song like it's recorded. And Ty's guitar playing is magnificent. The harmonies are there. They are on this tune, Give It Up. And a tune they haven't released yet, but they are playing live is All God's Children. It's kind of a ballad, if you're into King's X, it's got kind of a Pleiades vibe to it. Pleiades, incidentally, If you've never heard King's X, go listen to the song Pleiades. That's Pleiades, I believe it is. I'm doing that from memory, okay? Pleiades was on the Gretchen Goes to Nebraska record, which is kind of held up as the monumental King's X record, 1989. Pleiades was the real first King's X song that sounded like King's X. All right, long before they were signed, Ty Tabor's messing around with drop tuning, and they had been playing what would be considered pretty mainstream rock and roll. They were previously known as The Edge, previously known as Sneak Preview, and playing like mainstream guitar rock. And then Ty starts messing around with this drop tuning, starts messing around with different kinds of weird chord progressions, and out of that comes this song, Pleiades, which is recognized in King's X circles as the first real King's X song. It didn't go on the first record. It went on Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. And if you want to get a vibe for what this band sounds like from its origin, the song Pleiades and All God's Children sounds like that. Ty Tabor sings on it. Jerry sings this great backup on it. It's like a plodding 6/8, heavy, it's so heavy. Just magnificent. This new record's going to be really, really something, and I want you to be ready for it. So go check out the entire King's X catalog. Listen to the first 6 records, As a starting point, listen to the first 6 records. But you can go hear Let It Rain. You can go hear Give It Up. The studio releases are out there right now. They're rocking. They sound great. Some really cool harmonies on Give It Up. And they're just giving you the flavor, man. And I'm stoked about this record, 3 Sides of One. Really, really looking forward to it. One more real quick. Death Cab for Cutie has a new record coming out. I've been a big Death Cab fan. Well, I need to qualify that. I was for a while a big Death Cab fan. Back in the early aughts, when I was introduced to Transatlanticism and then Plans. And this is kind of hot on the heels of me being an Archers of Loaf fan. The Loaf were my segue into indie rock and art rock, and some of this stuff was just not what I would have listened to before. And so now I'm into the Weaker Thans and the War on Drugs and whatever. The Loaf was the gateway. And then you get to Death Cab for Cutie in the early aughts. They have released some really winsome and longing indie rock music. And Jason McGurr is one of my favorite drummers on planet Earth. Dude is fabulous, and I've stolen a lot of stuff from Jason McGurr. What I can play that he plays. I've lifted a lot of that. Death Cab's new record, Asphalt Meadows, is coming out September 16th. They got some new tunes out that you should check out. Here to Forever is one. Go watch the video. It's very funny. It's Ben Gibbard from the band showing up to collect the records, and the records aren't ready. These kind of slacker chicks are running the place. They're like, well, come back in 9 months. And he's like, 9 months? They're supposed to be ready. And they're like, well, if you want to dig in right now, we can make them. And so it's a video about Ben Gibbard making the records. Maybe a little pointing at the industry for, get your act together. Reminds me of this Killer Dwarfs video for Stand Tall. That's going back a ways. That's mid-'80s. Killer Dwarfs, that video is about them making their first record. There's like a pot on the stove, and they're putting all this junk in to create the vinyl, and then they squish it through a tube onto a mold, and they put the sticker on with a plunger, and they've got the guy is sketching the cover, and this is as the song is playing. And then they wrap it in saran wrap, and then put it in a microwave, and hit the button, and then the actual record appears. Very powerful. The Death Cab video for Here to Forever reminds me a little bit of that. Kind of a fun story video. Death Cab I loved up through Transatlanticism and Plans, and then since then, the records for me have been kind of hit and miss. There have been songs that I liked on all of them, and then songs that didn't quite work for me. I think the style has changed a little bit. I think they're trying to be a little more ambitious maybe in the songwriting. Ambition might not be the right word. Some of the songs have been a bit weird. Some of them have been just not as catchy to me, to my ears. That doesn't mean they aren't as good. They're just different. But I like the new stuff. I like Here to Forever. It's got a cool vibe. I've seen Death Cab live, I think, 3 times. Once, I leaned on the stage, basically, and got to watch Jason McGurr from 20 feet away, and I left the room a better drummer. My hands were positioned differently after watching that dude play. He's magnificent. Check out the new Death Cab stuff. Check out the new King's X stuff. Check out the new Archers of Low stuff. You know, add to your sonic palette. Kids, is good for you. You might actually dig some of it. I'm going to go. I had no idea I was going to get this far. Baseball. Who'd have thought, man? Baseball. Want to thank you for listening. Want to thank you, as ever, for all of your support. You can find me on Instagram, JW_Huff. You can find me on Facebook at The John Huff Podcast. You can find me on TikTok, believe it or not, at The John Huff Podcast. Please do consider patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. Want to thank you again. Hope you're doing well. Drop me a line. Drop by my website, john-huff.com, where you can catch all the show notes. I do a blog post now for all of these episodes. You can find some music there that I played on. You can find my tour blogs there. Some compelling reading. Want to thank you for your support. Want to thank you for hanging in. I want to wish you the best of the following week. I've got an interesting week ahead. Maybe we'll talk about it next time around. Shooting video, playing a couple shows. Going to be cool. More on that later. Hope you're well. Take care of yourselves. And hey, I'll check you later. Yeah. Okay, no way. Blue Jays, Ben Jays, let's go home. There's always haters, man. There's always haters. But do you remember where you were when the Jays won the World Series? Man, we had some rivalries after that.